I know what has happened is we don't have all it's what is being given and the synthetics. That is what has changed.
Oh yeah.
How do I start taking my high school if I would get? Do I go to boarding school or do I
Outside voice. Outside voice. Outside voice.
Outside voice, ready to go.
I mean, it's not too bad. It's not too bad.
No, yeah, no.
A whip.
Good rugby teams.
Yeah, they're pretty good at sports.
I had the principal.
Kia ora tātou.
Can do that.
No mai haere mai ki tēnā hui. I will start with karakia. Tuia ki ronga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te here tangata, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, haue e, hui e, tākia. Yeah, welcome everybody again, and to you too, Councillor Callagher on Zoom, I believe, and no apologies today, so that's great.
Thank you.
Public forum, no requests received. Confirmation of the agenda, it's confirmed as published. We don't need to do anything. Declarations of interest, councillors are reminded to advise of any changes. No presentations today. Confirmation of minutes, that the minutes of the public and active transport meeting held on 9th of May be confirmed as a true and accurate record. Has everyone had a look at those? Happy? Okay, so moved, Kate, seconded, Alan, thank you very much. And is it? And put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Yeah. So, Matt, we'll move on to actions from the resolutions of the committee. There's none that are open, so we can move on from there. Matters for consideration, the transport operating environment, and we haven't got Nick here today to present that. We're going to give a thank you, Nick, in absentia. So we've got Anita and Lorraine coming up. Thank you, nice to see you both. I will actually say a few words before we start on this about what we've got going on today, because there's quite a bit in here, and covering this operating environment. It's got some interesting areas to consider. The finalised government policy statement on land transport, the winding back of the land transport rule around setting of speed limits, and updated parking and towage fees. The Regional Transport Committee has completed its midterm review of the combined Regional Land Transport Plan. E-signage installation continues apace, which is great to see. I know there's been a few issues at places, but we're there. In Queenstown and Dunedin, that continues. Ministry of Education, this one's causing some interest around the place. It's continuing to withdraw school services as public services become available. And what's that?
It's always had that policy.
It has. So this carrying on. So we're going to see all of this is in our current environment. And our bus patronage up 21% on last year in Dunedin, 51% in Queenstown. There's some reasons around that. But I do thank the transport team. That has been an almighty effort. And we're seeing recovery plus growth in our services post-COVID and the associated reliability disruptions that we've had. And the public does seem to be regaining confidence in those services, which is awesome. There's been serious issues to navigate with that. 99.6% of our buses show up. That's very different from how things were, and I'm very pleased with that. Edging towards that 100, which is great. And increased services have been well supported, especially on the Mosgiel route. Revenue's well up, worth noting the decline of the ferry service, patronage 20% down. It's in Queenstown, revenue 29% down. It's not really surviving that resumption of full price fares and removal of Community Connect. So we'll have to talk about that, and we'll consider the scope of the review of the Regional Public Transport Plan, which is coming up. And finally, we'll have an update on the rollout of the National Ticketing Scheme. And I hope I haven't taken all what you were going to talk about, Lorraine and Anita, but I'll pass over to you for our operating environment, please.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So
Sorry, it hasn't turned on.
is that better?
No.
See what it is. Yes.
Okay.
Magic touch.
Thank you through you, Madam Chair. This report, as you mentioned, was prepared by
Nick Sargent, who I just thought, although he can't be with us today, I would, some of you will know Nick from DCC days, but don't get confused, he has joined Otago Regional Council and is the transport planning lead in transport. So and just moving on to the detail of the report, as mentioned, just noting the finalisation of the government policy statement on land transport, which was, I think we mentioned this briefly in the council report when we talked about the adoption of the LTP. I guess was a significant movement from the draft, from the original draft pre-election to the new draft post-election, and there has been some movement, I guess, towards a middle point in the final GPS, but the GPS is very clear around the government priorities, and especially in relation to transport and as public transport, sorry, and as we've discussed probably more fully in the Regional Transport Committee, in terms of the priorities, in terms of North Island and South Island transport investments. And the other thing to note is we're just recording, I hope you've all been advised that we've had our indicative allocation from the New Zealand Transport Agency on our co-funding for what is our continuous program. So that's all the business that we're already doing. And then once the National Land Transport Program gets adopted in September, we'll then find out how our how successful we've been or what we've achieved in terms of co-funding for what we call our improvements, which are those activities that come out of the Queenstown Public Transport business case, and our other services that we were looking at or are looking at to introduce in local services in Cromwell, Alexandra and Clyde, Wanaka and Oamaru, and at Alcliffe at the Dunedin connection. And then just to note in the activities, but again, the chair's already mentioned most of them. We've adopted the land transport plan, joint land transport plan with Southland, and that was submitted to Waka Kotahi in the past couple of weeks. Continue with our e-signage installation. We've completed and commissioned a joint project with DCC for the Union Street stops, premium bus stops, and there is also information on the conversations that we've been having with the Ministry of Transport around the withdrawal of Ministry of Education school services in Queenstown. However, those are specific conversations that have been ongoing between ourselves and Ministry of Education. But I think the elected members might be aware that there's a lot of discussion coming through national media because Ministry of Education has a set amount or it's what they can spend on school services. It has criteria that are quite fixed, and obviously with the new government there's probably a increased focus on spending to the limit of what they have to provide school transport. So where in the past what deemed to be ineligible students, there's a focus on where they are and the extent to which they'll continue to service those on their routes. And it will affect Queenstown in particular, but also Dunedin. And we're just working through those issues. And also what didn't get mentioned in the executive summary, but we have attached the draft, as they were the draft minutes from the latest South Island Regional Transport Chairs meeting. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Lorraine. Kate.
I appreciate, and it's probably too late, but there's the two issues that I've got with the fines and fees, or the opportunities that the new parking infringement and towage fees. Now, it's too late to write, but have they come out with their decision?
I understand they've come out with the decision, but I would have to come back to you to confirm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I suppose the feedback I would have liked to, and I just want to raise it because I think sometimes we don't have opportunities to speak, or our meeting schedules don't necessarily afford us the opportunities. There's two ones. One was the passing on the rural roads, school buses in 100k areas, really ramping that up. We've had at the regional land transport quite a few submissions. People submitting about how frustrating it is. It's people not going 20k's past parked school buses, and the consequences at times have been terrible. And I would have liked to have supported that. The other one is, and my frustration that we spend as a public, for controlling public buses services, is that there is no requirement to give way to a bus that's trying to pull out, and it really disarms that whole bus service. And I think we should be trying to get a law in there, and this is the first time I've been able to raise it legitimately, but what we can do to try and get that rule changed, to have a system. I don't know what the best process is, but when you don't have a good way for a bus, then we're compromising the bus service.
So is the question there, how do we start?
Yeah, how can we?
Do you mean a school bus or all buses?
All buses,
Really?
yes.
Hmm.
It makes sense. If we're a road authority, we want the bus services to work effectively.
Yeah, we
It
don't
is
want to give
for
them
some.
priority though, over cars.
We're probably getting into discussion rather than questions here, so
the
let's just
question
have
is
the
with
question.
staff is, when can we raise that as an issue? I mean, is there any chance that we can do, and how do we formulate the policy on that?
So through the regional sector, transport regional sector group of officers, we do discuss this, and I can take it back. Periodically, we do discuss it, and periodically it kind of gets onto, I guess, the New Zealand Transport Agency's work program to look at it as a, because it's a change to legislation of way rules, and I can certainly take back the concerns through there, through that forum, and then it would also be appropriate, obviously, to consider it at the other forums like the Regional Transport Committee and the South Island Chairs.
Jump into there. There's a staff ability to through the sector and through the special interest groups. Given there's no formal process open at the moment, the other option open to the council table is to write to the relevant minister expressing the position of the council. But I think it's important that we get the position clear before there was any agreement. So it might be something that staff would have to bring back a paper on to get clarity on what that position is before we write. But my suggestion is that would be the appropriate way to raise it. So, similar to what we've done with the weather radar and those sorts of things, but it would be important that we had that position clear, which would require a decision.
And I'm happy to leave it to the chairs to decide whether that's a good thing to do or not.
Thanks, Kate. I've got Elliot, Michael and Kevin.
No, mine's been answered with that.
Yours has been answered?
Yeah,
okay,
thanks.
so go to you, Elliot, and just a reminder, we're looking for questions here. I'll come to discussion shortly.
Just on those Ministry of Education withdrawals, are we expecting any? Are we just expecting like parents to start driving their kids to school, or expecting some increased demand there? And then are we anticipating that the capacity increase we've got in the LTP would cover any increased demand we would get?
So there's different horses for courses. Queenstown, as I said, we've sort of had more extensive discussions, because the issue is the way that I guess the students become ineligible in terms of Ministry of Education techniques is a combination of where and when we increase public transport services. versus which in Queenstown is because we're putting in public transport to either new areas of development or to support growth in certain areas. So that in that context, it would be covered in, and we have factored it in our sort of plans through the Queenstown Public Transport business case. In Dunedin, where we have an existing network, and the reality might be there's 5 or 6 eligible students on a service because they meet the criteria in a rural hinterland, but then they come through the urban area because the services to the nearest school, and some of the ineligible students are on a route but using it to access a school which is not the nearest route. And so there's a whole lot of different things involved in assessing the impact of that would have on our network.
I'll just add to that too, because we have had a direct discussion with the ministry on this, and the critical thing that we raised with them was the communication with schools and students using the services currently, because we've seen in the past where there hasn't necessarily been good joined up conversations with everyone impacted by the changes. The policy has been around forever, and you know they're looking to enact that, but we have made it clear, and we've also ensured QRDC have been in the loop through the joint public transport meetings we have with them, that there has to be some very deliberate discussions with the schools and the students who are impacted, so there's no surprises, and appropriate plans can be put in place.
Thanks, everybody. Michael.
Thanks. I'm still trying to understand I'm still trying to understand the Queenstown problem. As Richard's just commented, the ministry's policy has been around since God. I remember arguing against it all for particular exclusions back in the 1990s. So it's been around forever. It's enacted throughout the Otago region, including where I live. And it's a pretty clear policy. So the problem is what exactly in Queenstown?
The problem is, I guess, the criteria that would make the students ineligible are distance-based, but also based on whether there's a suitable, which is not well defined, or adequate public transport available. And as we've increased public transport services, so that relates primarily, although it's not specified in the criteria, to the times at which children can arrive at school or would be picked up after school within after an hour. So as
you're saying to me that you're putting on new services that don't necessarily align with the school starting and finishing timetables?
No, when we put on the public transport services for, say, a new development, they are on a timetable, and then they do enable or can enable children to get to school on the public transport network. However, the ministry has continued, because the services, to still run those services, and now they are giving us notice that.
Okay.
So I would summarise it as that there's not an issue. It's just that the policy hasn't necessarily been applied strictly, but now they're looking to, and we've just got to make sure it's well communicated. And
because I hate to think there's going to be an exception for Queenstown, and that we'd be advocating for such, because I just wanted to make that quite clear, because in Cromwell and Wanaka and a whole series of other regions, we live by that policy on a daily basis, and have done for yonks. So, and I think it's perfectly understandable if Queenstown.
I think we're getting into discussion now.
No,
Michael,
I'm just saying.
if you have a question.
No, if I do have a question, I just wanted to make sure that we're not actually advocating for a change in policy.
I haven't seen a suggestion that we're advocating for anything here.
I just want on one day, on the record. Yeah.
Thank you. Gary.
Thank you. Well, that question might just have been answered, but I'm going to ask it anyway, because when that policy changes, what obligation do we then have to, because we are picking up that service, do we just continue on as business as usual with our public transport service, regardless of the fact we are now collecting potentially children that would have been on a school bus? Is there any changes we make? Is there additional driver training? Is there responsibilities when it comes to children not getting off stops for schools? Or do we just continue on as business as usual, and parents who choose to use the public transport service for picking up the school bus service they were used to, then have to accept that it's a different service?
Lorraine, can you answer that?
So in the case of Queenstown, as I sort of mentioned, we have looked at having capacity in the network for picking up the trips that need to be taken on the public transport network. And because they're more significant in terms of the new development that's happened, and as I've said, we're supplying public transport there, that has just caused, I guess, if you like, a little lump between who's taking the passengers and who's got the buses and the drivers, that we're working through with Ministry of Education to make that as smooth as possible for the community. In terms of continuing on as usual, it's, as I tried to say before, it's a little bit of a different story in some of the other, well, this is only the Dunedin network, because the trips that the school bus that children are taking on school buses are directly going to schools. And while some of our services we adapt to run past schools at certain times of the day, some of it is driven by the choice of where parents are choosing to send their school, and that is the conflict, I guess, with the criterion for Ministry of Education, because Ministry of Education is only taking children to
The nearest school. Yeah.
So that has a different impact on how we plan and modify our services.
Thank you, but we'll just note that there is no policy change. It's an enforcement change, I think,
Can
Gary.
I, Madam Chair, just to follow Gary's comment, it's a supplementary to his, please.
Only if it's a question, Michael,
Yes,
because we can discuss.
What he's talking about is duty of care.
But the question, please.
And that's a really important position that Gary's picked up, that I think we all need to take on board here. And it doesn't just relate to Queenstown, but also to Dunedin as well.
Michael, can we please have the question, or else keep it for discussion?
I'm just, excuse me, stop interrupting, and I'm just trying to explain
Actually, we'll
the
move on,
context
no,
of my
and we're not
question.
explaining at the
You're
moment. Thank you.
hopeless. What a hopeless chairman.
A question or not?
I'm just trying to explain the
so I've got
context
Brian
of what we're
Scott in
saying.
line, and then Kevin
You're
Malcolm.
hopeless.
Thank you. Staff will explain the things if you have a question.
The question is, are there any safety implications with the withdrawal of ministry services in Queenstown? Because from my perspective, and I could be wrong, there have been safety implications.
Oh, this is a question too, is it?
Okay, I've got a point of order here. We've actually had somebody who said that the chair is hopeless and then called them a certain name.
I heard all that.
And that will have been recorded, and I don't like that.
All right, I withdraw.
Chair.
I withdraw.
You withdraw, thank you. Okay, Brian, can I please have your question to the
But
staff?
if you are going to stop me asking
please.
questions.
No, you can have a question. Put your hand up and you'll have a question. I have Brian, then Kevin. Would you like a question, Michael? After Kevin?
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
Brian,
yeah.
can you have a question, please?
I did actually ask the question. The question is, are there any safety implications with withdrawal of ministry services in Queenstown? And if there are, how are they being managed? And as background to that question, just to reaffirm that my view of things is there's possible safety implications of what's happened in Dunedin, where instead of taking kids from home directly to a school and back, we now are taking them via.
So the question is there safety implications that we need to be considering?
And how are they to be managed?
So you've obviously there's safety implications whenever we take people onto the public transport network.
No,
and-
additional ones.
and they will be perhaps a little bit more unique or discrete depending on the cohort that's travelling. And we manage that as we do for all of our operations across the network. And we have to do our best to ensure everybody's safety.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yep. So when we are designing our network system and accommodating the fact that the government, the education is counselling their provision of service, so we're picking up that service, and their ruling is that you, as a student, you get free travel to your nearest school. Are we using that as our basis for our service, or are we in fact looking at accommodating those students to the school that they choose, which may be 2 or 3 schools further over? And if so, if we are doing that, how are we accounting for that additional cost to our ratepayers?
You know, it comes back to horses for courses, because that those are all the things that we have to assess in each situation. And I guess, if you like, Queenstown's easier because rather than, I guess, thinking of them as children getting to school, we know that there are this many trips being generated to go to this destination at this time of the day. And so we can factor that in quite easily. It does become more complex with the withdrawal of those services that actually may not be actually free. Sometimes students are paying for them, but they are still deemed ineligible. And yes, they may or may not be able to be catered for easily on the network with our current services. But obviously we're always trying to attract as many people as we can to use the services. So it does become a little bit like, what do we need to do in this situation? And it does also require a strong indication from yourself. And so we are looking at our current policy on providing school services through the regional public transport plan, which is also another paper on this agenda, because we do have current policy that we factor in when we're making those calls now, but that's all up for review in the PTP.
I think the key point though is, if the network is designed to be the best and efficient network, where schools are is one factor, but any change has a cost implication. So we don't make those changes unless we've had that conversation, because the burden does fall somewhere. So it's about making sure, the kids might have to walk a few metres to get to wherever they need to get to, or connect to a bus.
Yeah, and my rationale around that is simply that if I choose to go to Logan Park instead of Kings, and that requires us putting on a whole new bus, will we get the subsidies from NZTA if they're based it on the old? So you're thinking about it. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification too. When we talk about school services, they are public transport services that just happen to be designed in a way that means they're only really used by students, and there's not too many of those, and we'll talk about them more through the RPTP. I would say, just in context, the Dunedin environment is very difficult because zoning hasn't necessarily applied in the education space, and it means people are just going to school wherever their preferences, largely, and it means there's really interesting travel patterns, and we get significant pressure to put on buses from everywhere to every school, and it's not possible.
That's right.
The network does enable people to get to where they need to go, but it may require multiple trips, and obviously we've also had highlighted that by taking those multiple trips, there can be some unintended consequences in terms of where students congregate and some of those other pressures. So it's a very difficult and complex issue with significant cost implications, and we'll need to work through it carefully through the RPTP with the schools, and more importantly with this table, to understand what any changes might mean.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Michael, you had a question?
I just wanted to carry on from Gary's question,
Just a question, please.
just explaining. I wanted to
There's
carry
no
on from
need to
Gary's
explain.
question.
You can have it.
Please stop being dictatorial. I'm just
Don't be
explaining.
dictatorial. We have an agenda to get through. If you have a question of staff, please put it.
Does the Otago Regional Council accept or believe that it has a duty of care when it transports school bus pupils on the services it contracts for?
Yes, so our duty of care is to all passengers on public transport services.
But not a
which
special
includes-
duty of care to small children or vulnerable people under the age of 18?
I would have to take advice on a special duty of care, what that means. We have a duty of care for all passengers. But if you want some further information on that in terms of whether there's a special duty of care for that category, we'd have to come back to you with that advice.
Can I explain, Madam Chair, the reason I asked the question? It might help the advice. If you're going to be taking school children on a public transport service for which we don't currently have a service for them because it's been transferred from Ministry of Education buses or school education buses, who undertake special training, I might add, to become school bus drivers, and you're going to put them on a public transport system. What I'm interested in, that's the question that Gary was asking, is a level of service then required in addition to that which we currently provide for the public, now that we have children of vulnerable age travelling on that network?
So we can come back. What I would say is they still have to choose to take the public transport service. So it's not a case of us stepping in and replacing. It's a case of an option being available for parents and students should they want to continue to use the bus to get to school, but it's still a choice. But we can take some advice on that duty of care question.
And the second question I have is, if I'm coming from Port Chalmers, I'll just use this as an example, and my nearest secondary school, I imagine, would be Logan Park. So I can travel that far and the Ministry of Education pays for me to get there, presumably. Is that right? I'm on a public transport. Do I have to pay, irrespective of whether I live more than 5 kilometres away from Logan Park High School? Because as you know, Port Chalmers is more than 5 kilometres away.
No, because the criteria is the distance to the school, or if there is public transport available. So that's why I sort of explained when we put in a service, the actual distance criteria for that MED doesn't change, but there's a criterion that we have now provided a public transport. So we have made some of the students ineligible.
Right, so they have to pay the full fare or whatever the student fare is from Port Chalmers to Logan Park or anywhere else.
On our buses.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've been asked to note this report. Have you got a move in a second, please? Oh, Kevin, you have another
I've got a
question?
heap of other questions on other topics within the report.
Oh, okay, good. It'd be nice to get on to another topic.
Yeah. So page 8, paragraph 7 is about the speed limits and say that the government's winding some back. But they're also, when you look through the list, they're actually going further on some aspects of the speed limits. But you just sum it up saying, if approved as drafted, there is a risk that the RLTP objective will be compromised over time. So I'm just wondering what facts we've got around that, or why we make that assumption, and that I would have assumed that government has done the work to minimise that risk by the actions that they've taken. But what risks have we now got?
It primarily relates to for the road controlling authorities for their programs, because programs were largely built under the first draft GP drafted GPS and the then current speed management rule. So the two things that changed was the regional speed management plans and the outcomes from the speed management rule, and the new GPS, which has has a different priority in terms of safety. So it's about delivery of the programs, but they're primarily the road controlling authorities.
Right, okay. So that will manifest itself to report to us at some stage that because we haven't changed a limit or a limit's different to what we thought it was, we see a risk, and how can we mitigate that?
So not necessarily to Otago Regional Council, because the change also in the rule was the requirement to have a regional speed
Yeah.
management plan.
Yeah,
And so now all road controlling authorities need to, I guess, adapt or change their plans. That won't necessarily be reported through to the council.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all your questions, councillor Malcolm? Okay.
And the other one that we had on there was, so going to paragraph 10 on the next page. You just made a comment, was like road classifications proposed appear ad hoc, which is a wee bit of a worry. And then I thought that government departments would have done an analysis of what they're doing and put it. So the ad hoc, so to me that shows that we have some degree of discomfort. Road classification proposed appear ad hoc. So have we got some discomfort of what's being done, and is that creating a worry?
I think it just reflects that there will be an element of uncertainty because there is not a complete alignment between the road classifications in terms of when we work in one area. It's just a potential grey area.
And further on that page, if I may, so going down to 15, this is on the indicative funding allocations for public transport services activity class, 94.7 million, which is, so that's what was the question there? So that's based on our service as at today. So as we increase, does this allocation cover any increased service and service levels, and will that be without an additional rate and cost? So so that's, I presume that's captured what we're doing at the moment. If we have another service, how will that be funded? And if we're trying to expand our networks.
That's what we're looking for in terms of our what we call our improvements bid.
Right.
So those are the new services that we're planning in Queenstown as part of the Queenstown business case. There were some services that we looked at after the fares and frequency for Dunedin, after the fares and frequency business case didn't progress. We did a revised report to council. So those are currently in the LTP, but we haven't had an indication of whether we'll get co-funding. And there's the other things which we all call low cost, low risk, but in the LTP, they are those investments that are the local services that we talked about, say like for the Oamaru services, and they'll include the two Dunedin, Clyde Cromwell and Alexandra, and we were proposing something for Wanaka, but that became a business case for Wanaka. So those services were contingent on getting co-funding in the LTP through either that improvements bid or low cost, low risk. And when the NLTP is adopted, we'll come back and have that conversation as to what we've got from that allocation and then what that means for how we can improve services. And
thank you.
Okay, councillor Laws and councillor Weir.
Is there anything in the proposals that have come out of the government in the last 6 months that in any way compromise, contravene, or bring into question any of the long-term plan projects that the Otago Regional Council has put in its long-term plan for the next 10 years? So any assumptions that we made for the long-term plan, have any policy or programs, directives come out in this last 6 months that would in any way compromise or contravene any of that planning in the transport, public transport sector?
Public transport, nothing specific in terms of policies. It really comes, other than what's in the GPS, and I guess we'll get the clearest indication with the adoption of the NLTP in terms of government decisions on funding that will affect public transport.
So the budget didn't have any consequence upon our long-term plan with regards to public and passenger transport?
No, not in terms of our long-term plan. There are some small provisions in the budget that we could consider applying for as kind of like a fund, but they aren't programs, or they're not related to any activities that we put in the LTP. They are around what we do in our business that we may be able to get a little bit of extra funding for.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Wynne.
Just before my other questions, just on what you just said around those, some other small pools, will we be hearing more about that in the future?
Yes, we will bring back any proposals but basically what happens is the government might put in a little bit of extra funding through a budget, and then because it's not in the NLTP, there's quite a series of kind of how does it get allocated, because it's not under the NLTP. So they have to come up, Ministry of Transport and NZTA have to come up with criteria, and then we have to see if we're then still eligible to apply.
Cool. And then I just had a couple quick clarifying questions on the parking infringement towing fees. So currently a proposal, but are we expecting it to be implemented by 1st of October? And if it was, would that be DCC responsibility? And have we had any conversations with them about that, what they might look like?
Yes, we are expecting it to be implemented in October, and it will mostly affect the road controlling authorities. Probably need to point out that it was a very, very short consultation period, and there wasn't a lot of opportunity for the council to engage.
Thank you.
Happy to move the report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, mover, councillor Nguyen, seconder. Thank you, councillor Somerville, and is there any discussion?
Can I speak briefly?
Yes, please do.
I think the conversation and the report highlights the complexity of the operating environment we're currently in. And I think going forward, and Lorraine's alluded to, that we need to be adaptive and nimble, and we need to, like it or not, speak the same sort of language that's coming out of central government to ensure that we get the maximum benefit for our customers in the PT space. So, yeah, thank you.
Councillor Somerville.
Thank you for the report, and I'd also like to thank the RTC joint chairs for their submission on the land transport rule, pointing out potential problems around its cost benefit provisions, issues over local decision making, and conflicts with safety authorities. I think.
Thank you, councillor Callaghan.
Thank you. A couple of things. The setting of speed limits, I think, is a very worthy sort of rollback and change. And having in a previous life been involved in how the criteria that used to be in place to set speed limits was very strict and complex in relation to development that was alongside the roads that the speed limit was changing on. So what has changed, certainly in my area, did not make practical sense. When it comes to school buses, and what I actually see the concern with school buses is when a school bus service is changed, as is proposed to be happening in the Waikato Basin, due to the rapid urban expansion that's changing there, the service is totally different. It's the polar opposite. And so I think as a transport provider, then the change that we would see is that number of vehicles would change, because those children are going to be delivered to school as opposed to taking public transport. I think the concern to us, I think the question was answered that our service really won't change. We are a public transport service. We're not a school bus service. So, that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Laws?
Again, I want to come back to this duty of care issue, which I think is manifest upon us, and which there has been the recent tragedy, which really highlights that for us all. If we are going to be transporting school pupils and those of a vulnerable age, I think we need, in the way in which we design our school bus programs, our public transport programs, we need to be cognizant of the vulnerability of the people who are travelling on them, and not necessarily their perceptual awareness, particularly around getting on and off buses as well, which I think requires a different skill set, or it's certainly an additional skill set to that which we currently foist upon bus drivers in general. I think it's worthy of noting that. The other thing is, I'd like to endorse Gary. I do note, Kate, that you and Jerry McPhail signed an agreement, very negative, I have to say, submission on behalf of the ORC and the Southern Council. Fair enough, that's what your committee decided on this. But one of those included rolling back the speed limit reductions. I have to say, in our neck of the woods, it was very much endorsed, and the proliferation of suddenly 40k signs around places like Wanaka on open roads was just ridiculous. But it's good to see that occurring. So we might slightly demur from the letter that was, or the submission that was made on our behalf.
Councillor Wilson?
I don't want to spend any action, but it is well informed by all of the road control authorities. The time that is required to change the signage is the issue. That to go back, and I think people have to realise the cost that has already gone into putting up signs, and sometimes road calming or road treatments to do this, and the idea that that can be converted back very, very quickly is a huge problem for the TAs. And so it was reflecting that input from the TAs. And if you look at that, the quantum of signage that has gone up, it's substantial. It isn't a quick, easy fix, and the timeframes that were required is the problem.
Sorry, can I just ask a question there? You mean they can't just suddenly change a 4 to a 5? Really? No, gee, there must be something seriously wrong.
Thank you. That's great for that discussion. Can I put the motion, please? All in favour?
Aye.
Yes. Anybody against? Thank you. It's carried. Okay, we'll move on now to 9.2, Dunedin bus stop audit update. Jack Harley here. I also wanted to acknowledge, I forgot before, that Nick Sargent coming to our transport team from DCC, and welcome to you, Nick. I know you're not here today, but we're pleased to have you on board.
I was going to drive the screen, but they don't trust me, so
I see.
I'm drive it instead.
Okay. That's fine.
So this one is about the Dunedin bus stop audit. It's pretty interesting. We've got some nice pictures, and probably Jack trying to bring them up so we can see the state of some of these bus stops. Some of them are very difficult as well.
Just
So Claire and Mary, who are the ones that get the familiar sites.
Yeah, what's the story there, Robson?
Yeah.
Okay, you ready? Can we write? Yes, there it is. Presentation.
Yeah.
Top.
Sorry, you go.
Just before we start, I've got on my sheet something called error reference source not found on
Yes.
a number of pages. Everybody else got that as well?
I can comment on that. That's my mistake. I was trying to do the cross references properly, so and have captions and then the text references to captions, and then it didn't come through in the when the document got published. So I should check back on that.
Can you see if we can get your mic working for you, please, Tim?
Yep, that's fine. So that's my mistake. The things don't carry through sometimes the way you expect, and I didn't notice it till too late. So I can see that we're dragging on with time on this, so I'll run through this really quickly. So just giving a summary of this project, the premise is in the past few years we've underspent on our low cost, low risk improvements for infrastructure in Dunedin. And that's sort of a legacy of post-COVID era. There's been very much a operational focus and this time for very understandable reasons. So we've probably gotten a bit reactive and we lacked a forward plan. And also there's been a lot of really good new guidance from NZTA. They've updated a lot of their public transport and transport guidance with new guidelines and the One Network framework, which is a sort of all the transport system framework for road environments and the like. And this is some really good work, and we're looking to bring it into some of our planning. And obviously in Dunedin, we've got really close responsibilities with DCC. There's a lot of division responsibilities, so we need to coordinate really closely with our partners in DCC. So we did that from the start. We also had some conversations with Queenstown because there's obviously a big bus network there. So we took some of those views and ultimately focused on Dunedin because that's where the big concerns are right now. We decided to do a stop-by-stop audit, which we'd done previously in 2015, and we looked to do a new version of that based on our current needs and requirements. And so the premise of the project is to look at what's the deficiency in a bus infrastructure. We're talking bus stops, and what's the priorities for improving them? Because we're obviously going to have far more issues than we can actually improve in a 3-year period or even a 10-year period. So what the most important investments? So we had some data collection from a consultant via Strata. They were already doing work with DCC doing traffic counting. And so they were very used to working with students. They collected data. Via Strata helped out with some of the sort of rural stops where there might be safety issues with just seeing a student walking along a state highway might not be the best approach. I mean, obviously there's piles of desktop data, patronage data, street lighting data, I think was done in a decent way. And so this is how we implemented some of the public transport design guidelines. So this was derived from the One Network framework, but the public transport design guidelines, they obviously go beyond this table, but this table is sort of a really quick summary of all the different things you might have at a bus stop and whether we think they're needed for different grades of bus stop. So bus stops can vary between an interchange all the way down to basic. In our initial assessment, we had about 700 out of 800 stops were standard. So that didn't make a lot of sense to us. So we made some modifications. We added a split between standard and standard plus. And we also, with feedback from DCC, we thought some of these standards didn't make sense. We don't want we can't possibly ever afford, or DCC can't ever afford a rubbish bin at so many stops. So those ones with the red box, I mean the white around the boxes, are just little tweaks we made in consultation with DCC. So most stops were, I said 50 to 70, 60 to 70, I'm overwritten differently here. 60 to 70% of the guidelines, note the guidelines, not standards. There's some very strong stops, but not that many. There's some very weak stops, but not that many. So deficiencies could be there is no shelter. It could also be, there's maintenance issues with the shelter. There's no expectation that we were going to get close to 100% compliance. These are new guidelines. They're quite ambitious. So these are aspirations, not expectations. So it's not this isn't the Building Act. It's not building compliance. It is high quality public transport infrastructure that we aspire to. And also just be awareness data. This isn't looking at each stop and making a personal judgment of that stop. It's getting some data and processing the data. So down the line, we make this personal assessment when we make final decisions. But this is a data-based approach. And these are some of a quick outline of some of the deficiencies. Some of the biggest ones we have are lighting, and we see a lot of problems with bus boxes not being drawn, smaller issues with curb heights around the network, and various other things. So some quick examples of different types of deficiencies. So we have this is a lack of a timetable per stop, which should have a timetable on it. This is a poor crossing facility. So a lot of these are things sort of within the realm of DCC, and the costs of DCC is the other anxiety. We mostly only pay for shelters. So when we're looking at curbs and stuff, or a lack of shelter, poor curbs. There's cases where there is a curb, but the road's actually higher than the curb because the road's been built up over the years. So there's a very big step up for passengers, which isn't great for people with poor mobility. So those are just some quick examples. And there's also VSJ also worked on a prioritization framework, which is just how we can weight different considerations and see how important these different stops are. So the main consideration is obviously how many people are boarding the bus at a particular stop, but we might make that a bit more complicated. We might say we give more priority to young people, old people, disabled people. We might also say, hey, a bus stop in a high level street environment, which is a very accessible environment, we might do it more important than a bus stop on the side of the state highway, even if they get the same level of patronage. So those are considerations we can use. One of the things I would say about this is we didn't ask our consultant to make recommendations on which bus stops to invest in. We asked our consultant to give us a framework in which we can make decisions. And some of that work in making these decisions is still to come. So it's about the thinking, it's about the planning, it's about how we think about public transport infrastructure. And there's also some GIS work. They provided a weird map, and our own ORC GIS team has been doing some work in the background as well to integrate some of this data. So we look into, this is part of a data-based approach and renewing some of these planning things, because as I said at the start, in the post-COVID era, we have been quite operational, just makes total sense in that environment, but we are now moving beyond that environment. So there's more work to do. We still need to bring the staff together to make investment decisions. There's a lot of talking still with DCC. They do a lot of the work and a lot of the costs around curbs or a lot of other things that are likely to fall with them. So that's still a constraint. We've got this NLTF funding decision coming in later this month or start of next month. And so that'll give us an idea of what our level of spending is on those improvements or potential spending. And in the long term, we do want to take all of a target approach. Queenstown wasn't such a priority for now because the bus stops are of a different quality in Queenstown. Most of them are really high quality, especially the shelters are phenomenal in Queenstown. But in the long term, we do want to take a whole of a target approach. And there's always challenges with maintaining data over time. Data can become very static. It might be that some things we say it's fine just to have a snapshot in time, but other pieces of data we probably want to keep refreshing, just as continuous improvement, continuous work, and then it comes back to RPTP, which we'll be talking about later. How does this impact our RPTP policies? So that's a quick run over the work we did on this. I'm looking for questions.
There's Kate first and then Michael.
Thank you for a really fabulous report, because it really opens your eyes up to what we could make a difference with in transport. And as tempting as it is to get down into the doggy deep and why we didn't submit to the NZTA on why we still got rubbish bins and not recycling bins, and I'm not going to get there. We haven't got the time today. What I am really interested in and understanding, and I think we've got very good reason after the accident in Waititi, is the how essential how we view the essentialness of a good connection in some places. And I presume that's what the crossing is in this grades, in
Yes.
the context of the State Highway 1 and a
Yes.
crossing in Waititi, and or how that might impact what we do as the roading, as bus operator.
Yeah. There's obviously lots of places in the network where those crossing issues are evident. It's very common. Obviously, those state highways, those 100 km or 80 km environments are really challenging. Doubly so in Waititi, where it's on a curve as well.
Yes.
So there was certainly consideration that those modal connections, every public transport trip has a modal connection to walking or cycling, or maybe occasionally to cars with park and ride or kiss and ride scenarios. So yeah,
I appreciate we can't get the answer today, but I
Yeah.
suppose as that will be thought at when we do the RPTP.
yes.
And if we want to feed in, or is it just an operational thing, we just should be out of it, just be aware of it?
Firstly, could I just say that, like, it's very important. Every crossing is important because every trip, although we plan routes and lines to connect, every public transport trip requires a crossing, because a return trip involves you'll get on one side and then you'll get off on the other side. It's more problematic to address it simply when there's a multitude of responsibilities in the road space as they become more complex on the state highways. But the purpose of this work is to enable us, as Jack has explained, to be able to prioritise. And so in terms of this council's interest and influence, that will be in the have we got prioritisation right, and what are the concerns that you want us to take into account where we've identified deficiencies. I also wanted to note that this information is being reported to the DCC Infrastructure and Network Services or something Operations Committee as well.
Thank you. Are you done?
Oh, well, look, I think this certainly raises some issues that
Just another question.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Or we can come
No,
back
the
to
question to the
discussion.
chairs is whether we can have a workshop on this or if there's any value in that, because it's something that I think that we all have examples of ones that we really would like to see ramped up.
Let's come back to that in the discussion. Okay, councillor Laws and then councillor Scott.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the table that did the preferences or the priorities that you showed up there on my thing. But I only saw it as a brief flash. Can you tell me, please, if any of the priorities that you went from 1 to 20, I think at the top, and there was one at Princess Street, I think it was number 1, I just saw it now. I get a printed copy just to explain, they get it on thingy. Is there an urgency to deal with this issue now? Is there anything that is currently dangerous to public or risk public safety from the priority list that you shoved up there?
This particular priority list doesn't give any particular weighting to safety issues. As I said, this is a framework in which we can make these decisions, so we can bring in safety considerations and also cost considerations to make a more complete weighting. So we have a framework under which we can bring in considerations like that. But in terms of the list I got here, I wouldn't draw too much attention to the ordering here, because I can tweak a few numbers in the ordering changes. And the considerations aren't particularly safety focused on that.
Okay, I'll ask another question then. You've done this piece of work. I'm sure it's cost a lot of money. I'm sure a lot of professional people have looked at it and stuff like that. Is there anything in here that suggests that there is a danger in any of these bus stops in the wider Dunedin area to public safety?
Not
No, there's nothing in the
nothing
analysis that suggests that.
Okay, that's the question. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got councillor Scott, councillor Malcolm, and then councillor Meeting.
Cool, thank you. So we've got this report. It's going to be an investment program to direct infrastructure funding over the next 3 years. The current standard is 60 to 70%. What are you aiming for at the end of the 3 years?
I don't know. We'd have to consider. I think what you do is you're in a conceptual sense, you're saying what would be the theoretical cost of bringing it to 100%, would probably be astronomical. And then from you could probably make a general assessment. I don't have a strong answer. But could be come up with.
Okay.
Could I just add that it depends on what is an agreed level of service as to and through the regional public transport plan, through changes in legislation from last time, we need to collaborate with the territorial authorities and because we're used to setting the level of service that we want for our PT services in RPTP, but this time we have to also establish the level of service for the infrastructure. Because as has been noted, as your experience and your comfort and your convenience and your safety in making the journey, it doesn't start and stop from when you get on and off.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Malcolm.
On page 97, in the introduction, it says that Dunedin has a medium growth rate, and the growth rate, I assume, will determine the priority or the urgency around getting something done. And all the information that I've been given around growth rates, Dunedin's would appear to be very low. So I mean, that to me, for someone reading that report would say, well, actually things are, we're going to have to act quickly. So where do they get that? Where do they get that from? And why is it there?
I recall a few years ago, Dunedin made the very bottom level of medium.
Can I just provide an answer? So if you recall, we've recently adopted our FDS for Dunedin, which adopted a medium to high growth scenario because that's the modelling. So based on forecasting, so I assume it'll be a similar baseline.
Yeah. And it's not all.
Things are looking up. Councillor Malcolm.
It's not all growth based. It's also just the quality of existing infrastructure. But obviously, growth projections would be considered something to weight. Doubly so if you do it in Queenstown.
So I have another question based on it. So when you've gone and done this survey, and I'll take you to page 108, which is a bus stop very familiar to me and so you've got there and looking at your beside the boxes beside it, curb height requirement essential, curb height is not there at the moment, and the potential deficiency is high, and so flat no curb increases step height. So I'm just right, that's been there like that for, well, it's actually better now, but it's been like that for 60 years, but they have tar sealed. And with that one there, the bus actually doesn't get parallel to the stop anyway because of the curve around it. So where does that next step come around who's going to, this health and safety and the actual balance around, because so where do you go from underspend to overspend, and where are you going to make those decisions?
I mean, this comes back to what I said is the approach for this is very data driven. It said this is the physical state of the bus stop. This is the standard. There's a difference between the stop and the standard. Then when you go in and you start thinking, are we going to invest in that stop? And you say, hey, what's the real local factors in that stop that can't be captured in a purely data driven approach? And that's a step before you make the final investment decision. So that's why we pushed our consultant to say potential deficiency. There's stops on hills where there's some accessibility measures you'll never get because the road's too steep. So it doesn't matter how important the design guidelines say that you can never do it with some design elements, and that's just because we live in a hilly city in Dunedin. So it's the gap between data and then going out in the street and making your final decisions, I think.
So I think the key is just because it says there's a high potential deficiency doesn't mean we'll change it. The cost of doing it won't reach enough benefits to make it worthwhile, and that's the next step of physically looking at them, liaising with the DCC in terms of their curb and footpath replacement, and then prioritisation. So all of those things will factor in.
Yeah, I suppose if I could add to that, my issue there is where does someone define from the data, which says potential deficiency high. So if you're data driven, that would say to me, well, it's high, I want it down to low. So
They've just answered that.
yeah.
So,
And that's just been
so
answered.
the next steps, and once we know what the funding looks like, is that's when we start to say, well, of everything that's high, what do we actually need to fix? Is how much is the cost?
Yeah.
As Jack said, if you want to get 100% to low, that's going to cost X, and how far back, levels of service. So all of that's still to come. This is just very much a desktop exercise. We need to add those other layers on top.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Meffel?
Yeah, I noticed in the report, it's described as if we have close responsibilities with the city council. Are they shared responsibilities or are they separate responsibilities? Are they responsible for some aspects of this?
Yeah.
And we're responsible for others.
Did you know that more than
Sorry, what are
80%
they?
of people?
Sorry, my apologies.
So in general, the primary spending IOC does on bus infrastructure is the shelters. And most of the other road environment things would fall with DCC.
The signage and
Yes, the signage. So the regulatory function as the road controlling authority certainly falls with them, and similarly with things like curbs, because that's just part of their general street environment work. Bus shelters we spend on, which is it's a different arrangement to Queenstown. It's a different arrangement to quite a lot of other places. In the end, it's the same ratepayers. So you know, it's about who's equipped to do the work rather than, you know, this set of ratepayers paying to IOC or paying to DCC. It's the same ratepayers.
yeah. So is it a functioning relationship that we have with the city council?
Yes, they were really helpful in this. They provided really good feedback. They were really DCC were really good practical feedback in terms of we probably try to be more high level and strategic, and then they can come in with a lot of the, hey, this doesn't actually work in practice. So that was really good to have that perspective.
So it's a shared working.
Could I just point out that we set this up as a joint project? We obviously led and funded it, but we had DCC in the project team, on the project steering group, and also on the tender evaluation panel for the consultants that were engaged. And as Jack has said, invaluable with that.
Thank you.
Can we start with going only burning questions, please, because we've got a lot to get through and it's just taking a very long time, even when people have already answered. But I do have Councillor Robertson, Councillor Weir, and Councillor Malcolm if he has a burning one.
I'm going to ask mine.
Okay, thank you, Councillor
I
Weir.
was just happy to move.
I'm happy to move. Good.
No, I do need to ask this question because you've just what you've said is the same group of ratepayers. So
Give or take.
yeah, we'll give or take. So in Cromwell or in Tapanui, when we're dealing with Dunedin bus stops, the current rating system has probably got that we will now have to pay 20% of Dunedin bus stops. So that's the funding problem I'm worried about. It actually isn't the same group of ratepayers. The DCC is DCC. ORC is quite bigger. So
We're getting into discussion there.
You've
Thanks.
made those
right.
ratings.
That's correct.
yeah, thank you. That's
Okay,
fine.
so on we go. And so I've got a mover and a seconder, Councillor Weir, Councillor Wilson. Thank you. Any discussion? Do you want Yeah.
Like, I mean, if you've used lots of buses in Dunedin, you know, to a lot of different places where you just walk around a lot, you can learn a lot about the history of Dunedin and its buses, with some sorts of, you know, tattered posters of referring to go-karts or even multi-trip paper tickets. So there's lots of opportunity to upgrade those stops, and doing so has a big impact for people riding the bus. Usually spend more time at the bus stop than actually on the bus, so it's really important that those places people are comfortable in. Not just places to wait, but the places to shelter from the weather, the portals connecting people from the bus to the shops or school or home that they're getting to, or to as a transition point to their bike or scooter or car, to take them the rest of the way. And so thinking of our stops as all of these things is going to be key to, getting the most out of our bus network. I'm sure we do get complaints about individual stops a lot from passengers, but I'm really pleased we're approaching this issue really strategically and methodologically. And I'm excited to see this progress. So very happy for us to note this report. Sure.
Thanks. Anything to add, Councillor Wilson? Councillor Malcolm.
Yeah, just to comment on it. Well, I think it is a great piece of work, and it really does highlight bus stops. It's got to be part of our overall experience, but the quality of the bus stop has got to be balanced with the quality of the service, and with our 99.6%, 99.4%. Sorry, I don't want to overstate it, but it's 99.6. So it just got better. So that's the work that's being done there. I think just absolutely superb. So if we continue that, we don't need to have such good. They've got to look the part, but if we know the bus service is turning up on time when it's meant to be there, and we're getting good service, I don't want to turn this underspend into an overspend. But great piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
I might just say as well, fantastic to get this work done, and just we've heard that there are inherent topographical challenges in cities like Dunedin or Queenstown. They're steep, they've got historic narrow streets, etc., all those things, slopes, and we're not going to entirely eliminate all health and safety issues, I guess, because of those inherent issues. So that the guidelines are guidelines, absolutely fantastic to be striving towards them. But in some instances, we're not going to have 100% compliance with the guidelines. We know that. So therefore, we need to just be thinking, as well as those hard infrastructural changes you could invest in, what are the other things we could think about? It's that duty of care type of scenario, the education, all those things that are the realities of living in fantastic places with interesting topography. Thanks.
Councillor Wilson.
And sorry, I should have asked this question, but I'm here to do it in debate. I'm really happy with the report and great stuff, but the NZTA are being blind to what was its substantial submissions through the regional land transport, and that's about accessibility for people who are blind or deaf. I was mainly blind, and having accessibility in here as a criteria and assessing those needs would be absolutely simple. Shouldn't be premium, it should be a standard.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say yes.
You're quite right, Chair, quite right.
Anybody against? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Jack. Well received report. Thank you, team. Okay, now we move on to the public transport network performance. And we've got a few authors to thank here.
6 months to get there to say yes.
Julian Phillips.
He's not listening.
And Gemma Wilson, Laura Faulkner, Grace Longson, Casey Casper have all helped with this, and overseen by Anita. Thank you very much. Welcome, team. Who've we got? We've got Julian.
We've got Casey and Grace.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to you all. Casey and Grace, nice to see you. And we're in your hands.
Good morning. As you would have noted, it's a 4-year report. Performance across Otago has been strong. We've got record patronage for the network and nearly 5.5 million passenger trips recorded in total across all the modes we offer, so total mobility, ferries and buses. Patronage for Dunedin is 21% higher than the previous financial year, as well as being a record for the network with 3.397 million trips taken. Queenstown, we have 1.897 million trips, also a record for the network, and 51% up from the previous financial year. This is despite a short-term driver shortage that we experienced at the tail end of Q3 and beginning of Q4. Total mobility also saw an increase in usage of 13%, likely driven by the continued 75% fare subsidy. And as was noted earlier, Queenstown Ferry patronage and revenue remain lower than the previous year. We think this is due to the return to full price fares, which we've discussed at the previous PATC. Also in the paper is a summary analysis of our new Mosgiel services introduced in September 2023, which are increased 15-minute frequency at peak times and a express service. We've seen an uplift in patronage of around 20%, plus capacity for January or February next year, where we know this is a popular service with small pupils, and capacity has been challenged on that route. Now we have more than sufficient capacity in that network on those routes. Just repeating, it's been mentioned a couple of times, we 99.4% of our scheduled services were operated. That's just over 452,000 trips. Missed trips were generally due to a combination of driver availability, mechanical breakdowns and so on. And as I just mentioned, we also had a short-term driver shortage in Queenstown, now resolved, but at the time resulted in a large number of missed trips. Lastly, in response to comments from previous PATC meeting, two of my team are here to talk to you about our customer feedback, which is focused on in more detail in this report. But to give you some context around our customer feedback, as I said, we've run just over 452,000 trips across the year, of which we received 2,292 pieces of feedback. Of that feedback, just over 1,700 bits of feedback were complaints in nature, which is around 0.3% of the total number of trips operated, or roughly 4 trips per day. Because we run around 1,500 trips per day on bus alone, excluding ferry and total mobility. We're also carrying record numbers of passengers, which correlates directly to increased levels of feedback. And we have events that are outside of our tractors and outside of our driver's control, such as congestion, concerts, accidents, diversions, and so on, which significantly impact our services and can lead to multiple tens of complaints on the same day on the same issue. So those sort of factors need to be taken into account. But I will hand you over now to two of my team, Grace Longson, who's the System Support Officer in Queenstown, and Casey Casper, who holds the same role here in Dunedin. We'll go over our customer feedback in a bit more detail.
Yes, hello. So at previous PATC meetings, we have received requests for more information on how we address our customer feedback, and we've reflected those requests in this report. Customer feedback data is broken down by both type, that is the context of the message, for instance, a complaint, feedback, or praise, and topic, which refers to what a message is about, such as driver behavior, timeliness, etc. Complaints are the largest category of feedback we received. We know customers are more motivated to provide negative feedback, for example, identifying areas of improvement, than provide compliments. However, this is not reflective of the general customer sentiment towards bus services, which our customer satisfaction survey shows to be positive. Driver behavior is the dominant feedback type, which includes matters such as drivers' customer service and on-road conduct, in addition to driver praise. As Julian has mentioned, in total, we received roughly 2,292 pieces of feedback from the more than 450,000 trips operated across this financial year, representing only 0.5% of total trips operated. Of this feedback, 75% of messages were complaints in nature, representing 0.3% of the total trips operated.
All right, so in the report, we broke down Dunedin and Queenstown in a bit greater detail. So I believe it's on figure 12, it actually shows the contacts by type that we received for Dunedin. Complaints was our largest category. And then the next chart down, figure 13, it breaks the contact types down into specific topics where driver behavior and timeliness and cancellations were our two predominant categories. It's worth noting that driver behavior is a broad category, which includes events that are perceived to be in the driver's control, such as overlooking passengers that are hailing the bus, or reports of dangerous driving, such as where the buses have to turn wide around tight corners, which is somewhat common to me. A frequent complaint, which actually is a frequent complaint, which actually allows for safe maneuvering. The feedback also contains some low risk or low priority complaints, such as passengers not enjoying the type of music playing on the bus.
In regards to Queenstown, the most common feedback topics were also driver behavior and timeliness and cancellation related complaints, related feedback. As Julian mentioned as well, in February 2024, we saw an unusually high amount of feedback in the Queenstown network, with a 275% increase in timeliness and cancellation related complaints, which was driven by the temporary shortage through February and early March. By April, this feedback had returned to typical levels.
Great, thank you very much. And now we'll take, go Julia. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Sorry, bouncing back and forth. But so overall, the feedback shown in the reports regularly reviewed on a monthly basis. We look into details and examine the trends that we review with the operations manager of each of our transport operators. And we use that information to work towards resolving common trends before they can actually continue. And we do take every complaint seriously, and we use the information that we get from that feedback to improve our services for all passengers and customers.
Thank you. Okay, I'm coming to questions now. I want to make sure that these questions are questions and that they're well focused and quite tight, and please not have too much repetition, or any would be fantastic, because we haven't got a lot of time. We've got a lot still to get through. So first, Councillor Laws.
Listen, this is a great report. Thank you for it.
Microphone, please.
I'm sorry. It's a great report. Thank you for it. It's really interesting. I'm interested though in a bit more analysis. And the analysis that I would want is, why have these things happened? So why have there been an increase in patronage in Dunedin? I really want to know why that is. There's a combination of reasons I could think of, but I don't see that in this report. So next year when you do it, I'm not doing it this year, I think you need to drill down and say, well, we think this is because of petrol prices going up, cost of living. We've talked to people, it's because they actually want to save the planet. There's a whole focus of reasons here I'd be interested in. So I think to improve this report next year, that analysis would be useful.
So the question is,
the second question I'd like to ask is then, why has the patronage of the Queenstown ferry service become so poor, dropped so much? We put a lot of money into that. Everything else is going up, and that's going down spectacularly. Have you done some analysis as to that those patronage figures?
So,
two questions.
The first one, yeah, we can do something along the lines of what reasons or what levers might be driving this. Some of them are kind of what you've identified in your comments. Some of them would be speculative. For the second reason, we have done some analysis. We believe, so the ferry contract is a net contract where the operator dictates their agreement, the price of the fare and the revenue. And we're in negotiations at the moment on the long-term contract for that. When the half price, it's a $10 fare for a standard ticket. When the half price fares were in place, ferry qualified for that. It was a $5 fare. So moving from a $5 fare to a $10 fare had a material impact, we think, on the on patronage, because it's more significant than a $1 to $2 change on the bus network. We also know that there were only 4 stops on the ferry, and by far the busiest one by some large margin is the Fulton stop, which is if you know, as you probably do, Kelvin Heights, that there's housing further down the road, but predominantly you're going to be servicing people in that sort of Hilton area, that resort, the restaurants and the hotel there. Therefore, we can deduce from that that tourism would drive patronage of that particular location, which is the most popular location. So there are other, there may be other elements, and don't have all the facts to hand, but yeah, there are several variables that might be leading to that drop.
And the issue of, just remind me, please, over the 12 months on which you've taken the survey, what were the prices of the buses in both Queenstown and Dunedin? Did they change the price of the cost of the trip or not?
So the price across both networks is $2. It was previously subsidised.
The whole 12-month period we've surveyed.
No,
that's the question I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't remember the month off the top of my head. It was in the previous report, but I think so that they were subsidised up to a point on something called Community Connect to $1, but I don't remember the month off the top of my head as to when it went back to $2.
Would it be a reasonable summation?
I think it was May, so I think basically the full year would have been at $2.
Would it be a reasonable summation to say that the cost or the price increase of the buses in both Queenstown and Dunedin was not a factor in the increased patronage figures that we're seeing here?
I think $2 flat fare in the context of some of the things you mentioned, the economic environment, the price of fuel. Look at some of the longer routes and the distance. You can travel from Arthur's Point to Arrowtown for $2. The patronage has remained strong in the face of the $2 fare. So I think we can probably take from that that the fare isn't putting people off using the bus.
Didn't put people off using the bus.
Yeah, going from $1 back to $2.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't think there's enough time yet, is there? Because if the fares went down, this report only goes till June.
Yeah,
so we can't really see the impact of the bus change. Can we?
Yeah, and the difficulty is in the paper we look at the total figures and the percentage change from the previous year.
Yeah.
But the previous year has been somewhat disrupted by driver shortages, COVID, other factors. So the key metric is that our patronage is at record levels. The comparison to the previous year isn't so important, particularly for Queenstown, where it was on reduced timetables for quite a long period of time, and therefore a 51% increase reflects the fact that the previous financial year we had a period of time where a lot less services were running because there was a significant driver shortage that lasted longer in Queenstown. So the year on year is difficult to look at. So next year we'll probably have a better picture. The key metric is actually, if you look across all years, the patronage in Queenstown and Dunedin is at its highest point.
Thank you much. I've got Councillor Weir, Councillor Scott and Councillor Callagher, and then Somerville. Councillor Weir.
Yeah, I know you just said year on year isn't super helpful, especially with COVID and stuff, but I'm just wondering with that, like the figure 10, where we've got the feedback by month, and the associated like location specific ones. How does that compare to previous years in terms of both in terms of the amount of feedback and that split between complaints and compliments?
Yeah, so I don't have a year comparison with me. I can do that for the next report, but it's broadly in line, maybe mildly higher. But when we have more passengers, you expect more feedback, positive or negative. In terms of the split, it's been broadly the same for the last few years, and my understanding it's similar in other areas as well. So the nature of the complaints has broadly remain. The trend is pretty much the same.
Would it be a lower percentage of total trips resulting in a complaint based on those numbers?
We've run a similar number of trips for the last couple of years, but there were other than disruptions due to COVID and reduced timetables. So there may be, again, it makes the previous year's data needs a bit more of a context around that, yeah. But it's certainly something we can do a direct comparison of for the next report.
Thank you. Councillor Scott?
Yeah, Cole, as a similar question, Dunedin's had an increase of 21% in patronage. Do we know how many school pupils have contributed to how many school pupils? Because it'd be good to have that in there, plus all the other points that were raised.
So we have the section report that gives data on patronage school services. The trend is increasing. And as I mentioned earlier about, say, Mosgiel, we expect as the new term comes up and we'll have a new cohort of pupils, then there'll be more people using those buses at peak times. Capacity on the network outside and now within Mosgiel as well at peak times in several services. But we don't have a student fare or a pupil fare. What we have is as was mentioned in one of the previous papers, services that run deliberately by schools either all day long at certain times of the day, and we have a child fare. So there's an element of assumption in data reduce on school services. But what I would say is that it's school pupil bus service is very popular with school pupils, probably more increasingly so over the last few years.
Well, it'd be good to have that information so we can understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Callaghan?
Thank you. Why is there such an exponential change in fare revenue versus patronage for Queenstown in comparison to the other two?
One difference between Queenstown and Dunedin is that the proportion of cash fares is higher. And we also take a lot of passengers on our busiest route from the airport, where a cash fare is $10 rather than the $2 B card fare. Now we have B card retailed at the airport. We have 7 or 8 these huge TV screen things around the airport now, in agreement with the airport, publicising the B card and pushing people towards the Paper Plus, which is one of the retailers at the airport that sells it for us. And we're actually selling many thousands of cards per month in Queenstown, but we still get a higher proportion of cash fares in that area, probably due to the proportion of tourists using the service. We saw during COVID that patronage dropped by a fairly steady sort of 40-ish%. And then when the sort of borders reopened, patronage recovered pretty quickly to previous levels. Without being able to differentiate between a tourist and a local on the bus, assumption is that the higher cash fares are being paid by probably by non-locals using the service.
But when you look at the change or the variation, I think it's 51% versus 32%.
Yeah.
Then that, in numbers wise, that must be massive. And so, have we got a problem around, if that's to continue at those levels?
Yeah.
Around fare recovery and payment for the service.
I can't comment on fare recovery or payment of the service. What I would say is other than what I was just talking about with tourists and so on, the makeup of who's using the service, if we have large numbers of school pupils using the service, then patronage increases, but the fare is half that of if we grew adult patronage. So several factors that feed into it. I don't think I'm in a position to comment on fare recovery and those sort of challenges in this meeting anyway.
Thanks, Gary. Are you done with your questions?
I don't know it's been answered, but yeah, there's no point in labouring it. Okay, thank
Gary,
you.
just add additional for that too. Just have a look at in terms of the pure revenue being generated, the concession types. We carry many more adults on the Queenstown network paying full price fare, as opposed to Dunedin, where we're carrying up to 20% on youth and then another 8% on child. So there is some impacts on revenue just purely through that side of it, which makes that assessing the growth in patronage versus the growth in revenue, that does skew that a little bit as well. But understand.
But I guess
sorry, I guess all I'm trying to highlight is that if that is to be the continuum beyond what we currently have, is it identified as a issue that we may need to rectify into the future?
It's not identified as an issue by me at this point in time.
The government position is looking to strengthen the requirement for the fare box recovery component of public transport. So it is something we're going to have a look at.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you much. I've got councillor Somerville, then Wilson, then Malcolm.
Thanks. Having enough drivers is clearly very, very important. What responsibility or control does RRC have over that, since we're not the operator? And how confident can we be it's not going to be a problem in the near future or the further future?
Yeah. So we have monthly management meetings with both our operators. One of the key and recurring things is driver numbers. And also for the last approximately 12 months, we will report to NZTA on our driver numbers as well, and shortages if we have them. The challenge might be the operators, I would say, both worked extremely strongly, consistently for months on end on recruitment, and we don't have any challenges at this particular point in time. As in any immediate ones that face us, and both our operators are near or full complement for the drivers they need. I guess the challenge in places like Queenstown will always be accommodation costs. So people choose, 2 or 3 drivers choose to move elsewhere or drive in another network, could even be Dunedin. The issue isn't so much attracting drivers, it's how they're accommodated, and it's not an issue unique to public transport. It's just the cost of living and the availability of property in that area.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
I need to do some context, and therefore you're going to probably ask me about the question, but I am going to, my question is actually not for the staff, but for the CE. We have a issue with a brilliant report that I think gives some really good data. There's some really good lines about praise for the bus drivers. And yet the headline in the ODT of a subscriber only is bus complaints hit over 50 a month. And the byline is complaints about bus drivers, dangerous driving dominates customer feedback. In Otago Regional Council report says. This report says so much more. And so and messaging about bus services is really important. It is what will get people getting on the bus and trying it and everything. And the question is, yeah, so it's in that context. The question is, are we doing everything we can to manage the way we put out information and then get it picked up by media, which can make really, really destructive headlines? And should we be putting out other headlines about it? Because there's really good stories here.
So we do a huge amount of work in that space, but we can't control what's printed, and we never will be able to control what's printed. So I mean, I've seen the same article today, and that's the reason why Julian opened the paper with some public statements about all the positive stories that are within this paper. So we do a lot of work on releases to try and draw attention to papers. We want the papers to be transparent in terms of the information that we hold. How people choose to use that information is not something that we do control. So we do have the ability through our social media and to push out our own messaging, and we do that as well. And I think it is important that we acknowledge the fantastic job that all of the drivers on the network do, because it's it can be a difficult job. And when you look at the stats, overall, they are doing providing a fantastic service for our community that use public transport. So we do a lot in the communication space, and we're continuing to try and do more as much as we can. We've just got to be realistic about the control we have over how people choose to use that information. But I don't think we should be afraid to put this stuff in public reports, because it's all information that we should be sharing with the community.
And look, it is. Look, I have to say, for the ODT, their idea of what we put on the bus
is amazing, and I love the optics. I just wonder whether we should be using the buses to do some of this messaging, so we can encourage people who are sitting behind in their cars to get on the buses. And I think maybe not the graph that they chose to put on the back of the bus, but we should be using some of this data and getting that message out, because
So the question is,
have we considered it? Or other ways of getting the message out? Because that picture of the graph on the back of the bus is pretty awesome.
We have considered, in fact, our comms team has put on from time to time advertising either inside the bus or on the back of the bus. We have considered the format of this report and how we might rejig it in more of a sort of customer facing document.
Thank you.
And so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you.
thank you, Max. Councillor Malcolm.
Oh, I was just happy to move it, really. I was going to ask a question, but I am.
Yeah, you want to have a chat.
Yeah, I want to have a chat and say
Yeah.
some good
Sorry,
things to
Malcolm.
Julian, really.
Yeah.
I'm
Seconded,
happy to move
Councillor
it.
Ware.
Oh,
Any further discussion?
yes, there's discussion. Yeah, that's why he wants to talk. You want discussion now, mate? Off you go. Let's see.
5,492,796 pods have jumped on a bus. So that's not too bad. It's been a huge increase. Queenstown is increasing, and we understand the services improved in Dunedin. We still have the hardy annuals that come from other areas and see a bus going around with only one person or no persons on it. But that's part of the service, because clearly at peak times we must be chock-a-block, because on average, if you average all that over the trips we make, that's about 12 to 13 people on every trip. So it's just, the fact is most people move at certain times of the day. So we're obviously increasing the service. We've got to ensure that it does pay, that we're not increasing bus transport deficits. But well done to the team. Keep working. The complaints that you are receiving are minimal, but keep working and keep treating them as genuine concerns, and I can see that you're doing that. So very well done, and keep those buses churning over, and let's see if we can fill some of those ones that haven't got quite so many on. I'm sure that will happen. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll put the motion on. All in
Sorry, I've
favour?
got to speak.
Oh, no, he's got to say, sorry. Councillor Laws would like to speak.
Listen, I'm not a great bus fan, and I never will be.
Microphone.
Sorry. I'm not a bus. I'll say that again then, just in case. I'm not a great bus fan, and I never will be. And like 90% of residents in Dunedin, according to our statistics, would prefer to travel by private car than we would prefer to travel by public transport. But I accept that, and it's heavily subsidised, of course, and by the 90% who don't use it. But I am interested next year, and I want to just put it on the record properly, since it's a matter of discussion, that we need a bit more analysis, Richard, of why the figures are what they are, and on any report that comes to us on a yearly review. So these figures show us X, why do they show us X? We need a little bit more survey. I'm sure that can be done. And also just defend the Otago Daily Times for a second. And listen, if any of us get into trouble or do something wrong, as an elected councillor, and I'm sure Kate, nothing would ever, or a community board member, Kate, or a mayor or a member of parliament,
We can just speak for ourselves, actually.
you will be on the front page of the ODT, believe me. And it just happens that way. If there's a complaint about you, or for, say, dictatorial chairmanship or something like that, it'll end up, as a complaint in the, I'm just joking, it's all right. It'll end up in the front page of the ODT.
If you have some discussion, please bring it now.
But I'm trying to say to you is that this is a fact, that there were complaints about bus behaviour. You've duly recorded that, and those, I think, are fairly recorded. I think the Otago Daily Times, by highlighting it, have also said to us, listen, there are things there that we need to look at. It's been my experience that complaints are a small proportion of the number of people who are really unhappy. So although you've got a complaint, it takes physical time, effort and energy to make one. And so there will be more people unhappy. I think we need to do a survey next year on the happiness satisfaction rate of people as well. I'm sorry, please, and I know I've got 5 minutes. That's understanding orders. So stop becoming dictatorial with me now on speaking times as well. So all I'm just asking for next year is, one, the nature of the experience that our public transport people have, and also some reason as to what drives patronage. That's all I'm asking. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we can do that.
That's
It's debate, Councillor Noonan.
I'm not in favour of the survey, but anyway, the best survey we've got is patronage. And we've got a 20% plus increase in Dunedin with a 50+% increase in Queenstown. So we must be doing something right. The service is becoming more convenient and more reliable, meeting more and more people's needs. We're in a growth phase, and let's hope we can continue to do that. But I think that the journey we've been on over a relatively short period of time, if you look back the last 3 or 4 years, is friggin' amazing where we've come from and where we are today. So well done to everybody, and including our customers. And I agree with Councillor Laws with regards to it's important to get feedback from our customers to ensure that going forward that we can further meet their needs. And there are always going to be things that will pop up in terms of will frustrate people. But as that ODT article alluded to, there are, and Julian's also mentioned, there are lots of aspects that are out of the driver's hands in terms of negative feedback about their performance. So I think we need to keep that all in perspective and in context. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Ware?
I'd largely agree with everything the speakers before me have said. I think the patronage trends we're seeing are really awesome and really encouraging for us to continue growing both the Dunedin and Queenstown networks, and all of the work that we're putting in between those two networks to bridge them in a sense. Do want to note that the driving issues are the number one complaint we're getting, and as Councillor Wilson sort of alluded to earlier, bus priority would be massively helpful to these driving issues. Reducing the need for drivers to squeeze the orange or make scary turns around other cars and stuff. And that's something that's already in DCC transport plans but not budgeted for, I believe. So us advocating for that is definitely something that I think we should be doing to help address some of these issues. Most of the other issues seem largely external, so we can continue working on them. But we've made really good progress, especially looking back years. And so getting this info and analysing it are some of the important steps we take towards that progress. And it's really good to see that progress. So.
Thank you. Councillor Kelleher.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really good report. I'd just like to highlight that I think into the future we have to be very recognising of the numbers that we see there. The change that we've seen over the past year is great, especially in Queenstown, but this service is funded predominantly by central government, but then heavily subsidised by ratepayers too. And we are changing our models as we did in our LTP for how this is funded and spread it further. And we need to be very careful that the funding model is right and that there isn't an imbalance towards ratepayers versus the users of the bus service. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just like to add my feelings about how good this report is as well, how well you as a team are doing, and that as a bus user, it's always more comfortable in your own car. And so getting people to ride, and more convenient, getting people to ride a bus is not easy. And you as a team are doing it, and it's doing it very well. So thank you very much for that. And with that, I will put the motion all in favour. Oh, right, a reply. Sorry, Councillor Malcolm. Focus, Chair.
So just summarising, absolutely critical that we do ensure that the funding mechanism is correct. But to the team, just keep aspiring to make the service better. You're doing a great job now, but just continue to do that, and yeah, just keep on that vein. To the ODT, the only thing I'd say, there was an old Anne Murray song that said, "I sure could use a little good news." Thank you very much.
Okay, put the motion. All in favour, please say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Anyone against? No, motion carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, team. And we'll welcome back Jack Cowie for our regional public transport plan. The committee's been asked to note this report, note the scope of the review, and to recommend to council the development of a regional public transport plan. But bringing us a bit of information, a bit more information about it. Jack and Lorraine, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As has been mentioned, this is just to advise that the much talked about regional public transport plan is now featuring large in the work streams for the transport plan this year. And the scope is being recommended as set out in the plan. It takes account of in particular some of the matters that we've been talking about in the discussion today, but I guess that a key driver for us is the most recent GPS and the current operating conditions. So while the regional public transport plan that we have is current, we have to review it within a period of time of adopting our regional land transport plan. That's a statutory requirement, and we adopted our regional land transport plan last month. And the current one does stand us in good stead, but it is a product, I guess, of its time, which was COVID. And I'm going to say we're out of COVID now. And I think we are, at least in terms of public transport and patronage, and some of that data that we just presented, it's really the first time that we can say we've always been comparing to 6 years ago, like pre-COVID, and now I think we can just report year on year and also provide better information, because the context of COVID was it didn't provide, well, it took out all of our understandings and our trends, and then we had all of the issues that affect patronage and complaints and things like that, reliability, and also we had a lot of intervention from the government around fares or what was being paid for by the passenger, with different levels of subsidisation. So while it stands us in good stead, we've got to recognise those significant changes, and so we've set out, I guess, a pathway for allowing us to implement improvements to the network that we've developed through in particular Queenstown public transport business case. So that's obviously a big change. Also noting that our drivers for our policies have to be different, and this again comes back to the GPS. It doesn't mention emissions for transport like a lot of our previous planning for the transport network outcomes did. And as set out in the report, we have the different key areas to address, and we will be providing more data and as much data as we can to help the council to set the levels of service that we want. And one of the key provisions that we're going to have to consider in terms of our policy approach is fares and fare revenue, because that is also in the GPS. There's a new move towards fare box recovery, which hasn't been specified for us yet. It's going to be a regional conversation with NZTA, but we know we need to start understanding the drivers better, and so we're definitely doing work on that, recognising that, as I think came through in the previous conversations, there are a lot of elasticities when it comes to the price of public transport versus the patronage, and we're happy moving forward. Yeah. Any questions?
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Scott, Councillor Malcolm.
And I'm going to discuss something the key topics: network design, land use and long-term network planning. The topics that, and so the other one was spares, the region-wide, I think I missed something, the region-wide is in the land, in the second topic, is it? Or the scope, I mean, if we were going to do a bulk focus need and bus service, is that in one of these key topics?
We would consider that under network planning or network design principles.
Yeah.
You know, there's always going to be a region-wide layer. Obviously, the regional scale services are going to be at a lower service level, so there's always a focus on the big urban areas, but also taking that into the context of a target-wide network perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's still always going to be focus on the urban networks because that's the main.
Totally appreciate that. I just want to make sure that I hadn't missed something because I wasn't really. Yeah. And in which case, if we're doing workshops, what involvement other regions would have in those workshops?
So we, well, the Act requires that we collaborate. So we've obviously already reached out to our TAs to identify how best we can involve them in our process, because although there's this requirement, it may not have even been noticed or acknowledged at the territorial authority level. And so they may not have made provision for resourcing. So we're trying to factor that in.
Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Cool, thank you. One of the key topics is fares on page 144. It talks second bullet point. It's got a flat fare structure, maybe simpler and more legible. However, fares that increase with distance may be perceived as fairer. I'm sure there'll be a few people in Wakaruiti that'll be starting to get a bit nervous to read that. For us to sit and have a workshop, what information do we have? Do we know, for example, what the average distance is? Do we know, for example, how many people are in this outlier situation that may be perceived, like is it a 3% situation, so that we can have these discussions in an informed way as opposed to an emotive way?
Yes, that's the purpose of the workshop, to bring you all the data.
All the data?
All the decisions.
And you'll be able to answer like the two questions I asked. What's the average distance? How many people are actually in these outliers that are, and also what is the social benefit by having a flat fare structure? So that we're able to, because what's happened is that the pendulum, we used to penalise those that travel further distance. Now it's gone this way. And if the pendulum swings back again, I just wonder what signals with, so is there an understanding of the social, and the reason I ask this is that we go into the workshop, maybe this is information we need to think about, what the social benefit is of a flat fare.
Yes. So it does need to be presented, or present with the whole information, because I mean it does come down to how you measure the social benefit, and that is always going to be a political decision. So for public transport for provision, you could say the social benefit is provided by what we call a coverage network, where these buses go everywhere and anywhere, provides what we desire for this community. Or you could say that there are better public benefits by providing more opportunity for more people to make more trips, which is what we would say would drive a ridership or a service level network. And it's where where the council is comfortable on the balance, because it's never going to be all or one. And that is, so how do you rank those social benefits? And then that becomes the trick for what are the levers to get, I guess, the best financial return and fare box recovery to deliver the best that we can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Malcolm.
On page 144, further topics, and sort of more particularly around total mobility, there's probably two parts to my question. what work are we currently doing with our total mobility suppliers and understanding what the market is out there? And are we doing enough to attract suppliers to invest in total mobility? And if you can't answer that now, well, is that going to be part of your considerations? Is probably what I'm looking for.
So we're doing a lot of work in that space, but I can't answer now because we've set it up, and it's also within the context of a national review of total mobility, which started and then stopped and may have started again. I'm not 100% sure. But yes, we need it for our own purposes to inform this process. But we're also trying to fit in with the national review.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville and Weir, and I'll just remind everybody that we are running tight on time and we've still got one more item to consider.
Thanks. In the review of this plan, you said we need to consider those matters that are in the GPS. Can we also consider matters that are not in the GPS, such as reduction in carbon emissions, which is amongst our own strategic direction?
Yes. Yes, it's definitely the plan where this council sets out its objectives, its key policies.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Weir.
Just on the scope of those 3 priorities, for fares, would that also cover potential things like a fair share program with businesses and things like that?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes. And then for the network design principles, would that potentially also cover how we go about doing sort of bespoke or adaptive services for like events and stuff like that?
Yes. The answer generally yes. It's there's potential for a lot of things. Like that.
Thank you, and thank you, team. It's good to see this in context and the land use, which is going to be very important considering that in lots of our areas. So Councillor Wilson is happy to move this. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Noon, and any discussion, please? Councillor Noon.
Brief comment on this. It seems logical, the proposed recommendations for us to consider to take us into sort of the new era post-COVID, because clearly our PTP is now outdated and needs to be completely refreshed and rewritten. So that's where we're at, and important work to be done. And the fee structure thing, we haven't had a really good political discussion about where fee structures should be and where they should be heading, etc. So it'd be really, really timely for us to get a feel for where governance is at. Sorry, I didn't turn the microphone on.
Awesome.
Looking forward to the fee structure discussion during that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is well outlined in there. And did you have anything to add, Councillor Wilson?
Right, I'll just do it as wind up if you like, but if that's what the opportunity is. Look, I see transport as low-hanging fruit for climate change action by this council and leading it. And I'm delighted to see that we finally get to the point we can do this. It's we need to be saying how can we get more people from the figures that Michael was telling us earlier to one where we have absolute choices that make sense, that they can get on the bus and reduce their carbon footprint. It's the lowest hanging fruit we've got.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All in favour, please say yes.
Yes.
Anybody against? No. Motion carried. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Lorraine and Anita. That is a great report and have covered that quite well. We'll move on now to an update on the national ticketing system. And I think Paul Edward. There he is. And Julian, welcome back. Thank you. Welcome you both. We're just being asked to note this, but there's been a lot of questions out in the public about it, actually. So in your hands, Julian and Paul.
Some of you may know Paul already. Paul Everett is a program lead for the regional integrated ticketing system, and has been with it since its inception. That's the BCOD. And as you also know, there's a new national ticketing system being rolled out, which we are a part of, which is quite exciting. And Paul's here to give a summary of where we're at with that new system.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. You've had paper, but if I just skim through some highlights. So something that isn't in the paper but is now available. We have a brand to the name for the card and the system, which is Motto Move. That was announced a few weeks ago. The key thing is this is a single system that's in use from one end of the country to the other. Fond rate in the card, you can use the same payment methods. The next big thing will be that those options of payment have increased significantly. You can now use your contactless bank cards, debit cards, credit cards, Apple Watches, Google Wallets, and there will still be a card, which will be the Motto Move card. And in some regions, cash will still be an option to pay on buses where it's needed by the local community. So some of that has big implications, as we've talked about in earlier conversations today. The thousands of people arriving at Queenstown and on the ferries won't need to buy cards. They'll be able to use their existing payment methods. So it's better for them and it's better for the team, the transport team. Yeah, and there won't be thousands of cards that are being used twice left in hotel rubbish bins all around the world. Other things, the card scheme will be supported by a national network of retailers, so people will be able to go into their local dairies and maybe even their supermarkets to both buy cards and top cards up. Another big change is that their NTA will be providing a national support centre particularly for telephone-based queries. There'll be an 0800 national 0800 number for people to resolve problems over the phone with them. Local councils will still be able to support walking customers locally. Timeframes, there'll be a small release this year in Christchurch. It won't be Timaru. Timaru will happen early next year, probably February. And that will be followed by the wider Christchurch region in around about May time. Our first region on board will be in Invercargill, and then moving on to Bagplenty. And then we'll hit each region after that over the next year or so. And Otago, as the lead council of the B-card team, will be going last. And we currently anticipate that to be around mid-2026. So in a nutshell, that's it.
Thank you. Questions? We've got Councillor Wilson.
So, I'm just interested about transition when that happens, is that we will get people coming down and visiting already with one of those national cards. And probably perplexed, will we stop charging for our card at some stage, or will we be able to run two systems at once? Because it's going to be a really difficult transition.
It is, yes, and people won't be able to use Motto Move cards on our buses until we move over to the new system. Nor will they be able to use credit cards. So that's why we want to move the transition time, to be quite compressed, I think. So.
Well, yeah, I would have thought that isn't necessarily as compressed as it might need to be. If I'm a student coming down in 25 with your, or just a visitor who's got those other cards. If you can't do both, that's it. But the other question is, are we going to charge for the B card when it's going to become redundant very quickly?
I think I can answer that. We don't have a formal plan yet for the transition.
Okay.
We will do, but to me, it's no different to when we transitioned from Go Card to B Card, which are two very different systems. And we had a very, very long lead-in period, a lot of communication, and then even after the transition happened, we had an amnesty period for, people who are overseas and that kind of thing, and some discretion applied where required. As I said, we haven't got a plan at the moment, but the transition will be very carefully managed because it will be very difficult for us as well as the passengers if that doesn't happen.
Well, and again, look, we've just had a talk about complaints for bus drivers. I'm really feeling sorry for the bus drivers here, where the people buy a card thinking it's national in Christchurch or in Wellington, come down here, can't use it, get frustrated, and it's then the left front that stuff. It's not the locals necessarily sometimes read the message. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Weir, and then Councillor Somerville.
Just wondering if there'd still be a differential for people paying who have set up a card or account or whatever versus people just paying with their debit card or whatever, just.
Yeah, I guess the key thing about the NCTA and the program side of things is that the responsibility for fare policy still sits with councils. So the option is there for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that might have been my question, but I'll just check. I was going to ask about concessions. You know, are they available? Can any of you register your credit card or something like that to get a concession across all those different platforms?
Yes, the process for concessions will be the same as it is now. So you'll be able to register your card and then get either local or national concessions.
Thanks.
And it talks about the in the paper about how it sort of happens overnight and you get charged the lowest possible fares.
Yes, that's right. So at the moment, everything is based on the card that you tag on with, whereas in future it will be basically sitting in the MasterCard system. So those fares from travel will be accumulated over the travelling day, and then overnight the process will run to work out the best fare can be charged based on whatever concessions you might have. If you have things like cap-in or transfers, it will be worked out overnight.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Malcolm.
So just on getting this message across, so we're last, and I understand why, that's cool. So when I'm a student and so the first lot goes on is Christchurch, so I'm a student that's made a really good decision, it's going to come to Otago Uni. So I'm coming down with my Motu card and I'm going to have to buy a new one. So when I first log on to get my new card, will there be some descriptor saying that here's the schedule of when you can use it elsewhere? Or some link or something to say that there are, you know, this is a 18-month period that will take to.
Yeah, the schedule will be widely publicised.
Cool.
And when I say we're last out of our B card regions. We'll still be before Wellington and Auckland. So yeah, the challenges will still be there in terms of people will be on board, but Auckland won't necessarily. So they won't be have that opportunity to use our system.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you.
Is that it for questions? Thank you very much. Do I have Councillor Wilson will move. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Noon, thank you very much. Any further discussion? No, we'll put the motion. All in favour, please say yes.
Yes.
Anyone against, I don't think. That brings us to the end, and thank you very much for everyone's efforts in keeping things concise towards in the last few items. That was good. And thank you very, very much to everybody in the transport team. It's been amazing. And I'm looking forward to seeing the rollout of the system, and being last hopefully means that it'll be smooth in our region, but everybody else can iron out the troubles before we get there. So I'll quickly close us with karakia, and then we can head off. Right. Kia tau te rangi Māori e, ki runga o ngā iwi o te